What's up, everyone? It's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and this kind of news is really exciting for me. Simply because even though it won't directly affect me, at least not that I can see in the near future, it will directly affect a lot of other people, as well as potential big industry changes over the next, maybe 1 to 5 years. So we'll see how it ends up. But basically, if you're like me and you pick your PC parts individually rather than just going out and buy a pre-built machine, you'll always know that a laptop equivalent part compared to the desktop variant will always be a little bit slower. So let's take hard drives, for example. Standard desktop hard drive, standard desktop mechanical hard drive, I should say, will be a 7200 RPM drive. I know they go higher, but when you buy something, chances are it's going to be a 7200 RPM drive. When you buy anything that uses a laptop size hard drive, 2.5 inch drive, most of the time, 99% of the time, it's going to be a 5400 RPM drive, therefore being a little bit slower. I know you can get higher ones as well, but like I said, the majority of stuff you buy will have a 5400 RPM drive in it. CPUs, same deal. They might have a lower clock speed or a lower voltage simply because it's usually to do with power consumption issues and battery life. And again, we'll move on to the GPUs. GPUs, obviously, they have to take into consideration power consumption, physical space, and heat management as well. That's a big issue for GPUs. And a perfect example is we'll use the GTX 980 and the laptop equivalent of it, which is the GTX 980M. There's a 25% performance difference between the two. Obviously, the desktop one being higher and the laptop one being about 75% of that. And that represents the smallest gap in laptop to desktop comparisons. For example, the 780 was something like 40% of a performance increase, and the 680 versus the 680M was something like 60%. So it was even bigger. So 25% might not sound too bad, but at the same time, it's still a fair chunk out of the graphics card. But that all looks like it might be about to change, because Nvidia have shown off what is essentially going to be their new style laptop. Their new style laptop graphics solution. That's probably the best way I can describe it. Now, it's kind of been referred to in like leaked documents beforehand, but it may also be just a project name. So if you ever see it referred to as a GTX 990, you'll know it's this kind of thing. But at the same time, they've already come out and called it the full 980. So basically what it is Nvidia have managed to fit a full proper desktop 980 GPU, GTX 980 GPU, into laptops. So you get the full desktop variant 980 in a laptop. And obviously, the rest of the components will be a little bit different because you'll have a laptop variant CPU and hard drives, blah blah blah. But at the same time, with how far they've come, CPUs and stuff like that, that's not really too much of an issue anymore. So the main thing is you're going to have the full desktop 980 in there. So they ran a few benchmarks. They ran 5 benchmarks across 3 different games. And they basically they were running them side by side, and they compared the desktop 980 with a desktop CPU and a desktop hard drive and a desktop whatever, versus a laptop variant, which had obviously laptop CPU and all that kind of stuff, with the new desktop variant 980 in the laptop. So I'm not going to go over the minimum or maximum frame rates, because that's all going to be a bunch of numbers and it's going to be boring. But what I will do is I will give the average FPS of all 5 of them. So you have Tomb Raider. It doesn't give the settings used. I'm going to assume it was probably max, but because it is designed to stress it out. So the average FPS on the desktop machine was 105.6 FPS. Now, the average FPS on the laptop with the full desktop 980 was 105.2. So that's a difference of 0.4 FPS. So essentially, the laptop was 0.4 FPS of a difference. So it was less than 1 FPS difference. That just goes to show there is no 25% performance drop in graphics card here. You're getting essentially 105 FPS, the exact same. They did 2 more tests on a different game. Shadow of Mordor, test number 1. The average FPS on the desktop machine, 93.59. Essentially, it's 93 FPS. On the laptop with the desktop 980, it came to 88.8. So that's a comparison of 93 to 88. Not much of a difference. Only what's that? 5 FPS of a difference. So that's not much at all. I mean, that's still well above 60 FPS if that's your minimum baseline. And to do with stuff like G-Sync monitors and all nowadays, the difference is absolutely negligible. They did a different test, Shadow of Mordor test 2. Average FPS, desktop machine 93.6. Laptop machine with the desktop 980. This one was 88.3 FPS. So again, you're looking at the same thing. Still 93 FPS on the desktop machine and 88 FPS on the laptop machine. So that's still pretty solid performance. Metro Last Light. Now, Metro Last Light is a pretty intensive game. So the first test they did with the desktop machine, 85.1. The laptop, or should I say, excuse me, the laptop machine with the desktop 980, 83.6. So that's a comparison of 85 FPS to 83 FPS. 2 frames per second was the difference. That's absolutely negligible. Another Metro test again. 85 on the desktop machine, 85.7 FPS. On the laptop with the desktop GPU in it, 82.6. So that's a comparison of 85 to 82 FPS. That's 3 FPS in difference. That is absolutely nothing at all. It's, again, especially when you take into consideration something like a G-Sync monitor, which I can personally vouch for because I've been using a G-Sync monitor for over a year now. It's absolutely amazing. But I'm not going to talk about that for the rest of the video. That's not what this is about. The fact is they've actually been able to get this in here. Now, obviously, there's going to be questions that they didn't really talk about or answer too much, such as, say, battery life and stuff like that. And I know a lot of people out there are going to be talking about the same kind of things, like, oh, well, if you want to play games, why are you buying a laptop? I'm not going to comment on any of that at all because I'm specifically trying to talk about the technology in this video. Excuse me, I've got something caught in my throat and it's absolutely torturous right now. But you get the point that they've managed to put an uncompromised GTX 980 into a laptop. Now, what's that going to mean? Next year, when we get our new Pascal architecture, which is tipped to be absolutely amazing, which is what I'm personally holding off on buying before, or personally holding off on release before I buy a new machine or new GPU. Well, see, I said new GPUs, but I need to replace basically everything. So I'm waiting on that. And when we get that next year, we might possibly have, let's just call it a GTX 1080. We might have a desktop GTX 1080. And at the same time, on day of release, we might also have laptops shipping with desktop GTX 1080s. So it might be, you might get a parity card in the future on day 1. You might not have to wait 6 more months. You might not have to wait 8 more months after it releases. The fact is that they're able to do this now. I realize the GTX 980 is a little bit older. I mean, what is it now? We're looking at September. I think the 980 is released in September of last year, of 2014 maybe, or maybe it was August. But either way, sure, that's a year down the line of all this. But the fact that they can do it, now they have this knowledge and tech know-how to be able to possibly start sooner next year and offer a solution like that on day 1, or maybe 1 month after original release. But the fact is, it might not be a year, and people who buy high-end laptops, be it for gaming or whatever, they're going to have proper solutions available to them now. Like I said before, now all they had was, say, maybe a 980M, which was still a good card, but it was still 75% of the desktop equivalent. And now you're getting the full desktop equivalent, which is obviously very important, especially when all these new games, you want to crank the settings up to full or as high as you can go and still get a decent frame rate. And now, at the same time, because these are Nvidia cards, maybe someone who wants to buy a laptop with a desktop 980 or a desktop 1080 in it, maybe they want to buy maybe the laptop they want to buy has G-Sync as well. It's going to make it even better. So it's very exciting, the technology wise, what they're going to do and what they can do, and the potential for this in the future. Like I said, it doesn't really affect me. I don't use laptops, especially I wouldn't use them for gaming. I'm a PC desktop guy because it suits me and the performance is there. But that could, who knows, that could potentially change with all this being whatever might come of it. So let me know in the comment section below what you think about this actual improvement and this kind of what we'll just essentially call new technology. I realize it's not brand new. I mean, there were one or two cases of manufacturers putting desktop GPUs into laptops, but it wasn't really the standard and it wasn't really completely advised. Whereas this is all full Nvidia engineered and all, so it's kind of like we can just call it, I don't know, endorsed from day one from Nvidia. So let me know all that in the comment section below anyway. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You can follow me on Twitter, details in the description below. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the rest of the videos in my channel.